students?
They're seniors, so they're 17 years old.
And for which school?
NorthPointe Christian.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't hear about the Communist Manifesto till I was
we read it
my second year in college. And I only got my hands on it because not even for a class. I asked about it. A professor. He was he looked like Rasputin.
Okay.
He had like this, like the classic the skull, or not the skull, the hammer and sickle.
Did he now?
Just straight up, I'm a communist,
Interesting.
And so I was like, that's interesting. I talked to him about it, and he gave me his copy of it, and I was like, how come I didn't hear about this in high school?
Yeah. So we're just finishing up with Marxism now, and I could actually, from what we've done, go into postmodernism. But before we get to postmodernism, which is going to be after the break, we're going to deal with call it cosmic humanism, New Age.
Yeah.
So the first two worldviews we'll deal with are atheistic worldviews, and then the New Age is a pantheistic worldview.
Right. Okay.
So all the time that we're doing this, we're looking through the lens of a biblical Christian perspective, and so we're comparing and contrasting to.
It's not like you're going to talk about Christianity at the end. You're talking about
as we go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Like today, they worked on a thing. If you read James 5:1-6, and we talk about, is James a liberation theologian, and what he's saying here?
Yeah.
Because he's coming down on the rich and those who oppress the poor and stuff like that. And we say, okay, well, if he's not a liberation theologian, I said, then what's going on with James? And so we talk a little bit about that, and they kind of researched that. We talked about like Marxism in Acts chapter 2, verses 42-47, where they're selling everything and they're sharing everything in common. And we say, okay, is this an example of Marxism here? And they say, well, there's some.
A lot of Marxists say that, right? Like that's a classic text that they'll use to.
So we talk about here are the similarities, but look at the differences, right? And or when Jesus says in the synagogue in Nazareth that he is, quoting from Isaiah, he's the one that's come to release the prisoners. He's the one that's come to open the eyes of the blind. He's going to free the oppressed, that kind of stuff. And I said, is this this type of revolutionary, we're going to overthrow the Roman government here. We're going to establish because he claims to be the Messiah in that text. Yeah. And, or is it different? And so that's what we're doing. We're exploring these worldviews in comparison and contrast with the biblical Christian worldview. Okay. So we move through that. We do postmodernism. And then after that, we start getting into biblical apologetics. So why do we believe what we believe? Yeah. How do we know that the Bible is the Word of God if we claim it to be the Word of God? So what are evidences that the Bible has been maintained throughout, the centuries? And what we have now is a good... what do we mean by inspiration? We'll talk about. Because what you have is you don't have the original manuscripts. You have copies of original manuscripts. And you don't have the original language. You've got translations of the original language. So how can you justifiably say that the English translation that you have here is a God-breathed? Sure. Yeah. And so we discuss those things. Or we discuss just many things when it comes to apologetics. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's out there that's coming against Christianity. And then we finish the year with ethics. So we say, okay, what is biblical ethics? And is it a situation ethic like Joseph Fletcher talks about? Is it a consequentialist ethic like Peter Singer talks about? Is it an absolutist ethic? And what do we mean? So it's a really robust curriculum and really dig into things. And So anyway,
well, cool.
I love that curriculum.
Yeah. So I guess I'll kind of.
It was a highlight of a lot of people's things. But anyway,
I'll just let you. We can pray. I'll just let you kind of anchor this one, because you kind of have an idea in your head, and I'll just pop off with questions and comments.
Yeah.
So
one thing I think I would like to talk about, and this is one of the things we start off with in our Worldview class, is as we talk about identity, and with any worldview, the first two questions is who is God and who am I, right? If you've seen the movie, the Truman Show, right, with Jim Carrey, long time ago.
Oh yeah.
When he finally comes to the realization that he's been in a kind of a make-believe world. He runs into the wall, and he's climbing the stairs, getting ready to leave. And Christoph, who is the God character, speaks to him. He looks up and he says, "Who are you?" And then he says, "And who am I?" And then the true man, and for reasons I think are obvious, in order to be the true man, you have to reject that God, and then you have to choose. No matter what's behind that door, you're leaving, right? So we talk a little bit about that. So those two questions. So when it comes to atheism, you say, well, who is God? There is no God. If there is no God, then who am I? Well, I'm the product of random chance mutations over long periods of time, and somehow, right, something came from nothing, and somehow we're here. We don't know how. But in order for us to have any hope at all in secular humanism, we have to be good and inherently, and we have to be ultimately perfectible. Well, how can we be perfectible? And I think Abraham Maslow probably gives us the best solution in his hierarchy of needs, and self-actualization being at the pinnacle there. So as long as your physiological needs are met, your safety and security needs are met, self-esteem needs or your love and belongingness needs are met, your self-esteem needs are met, then you're in a position to be self-actualized.
Okay.
Brad Pitt, there's an article in Parade magazine that I read, and as I was reading that article, I thought, my goodness, he's just going right up the hierarchy of needs. He's talking about how when he was growing up, his dad ran a trucking company, and his mom was a school counselor, and she would talk to him about questions that he had about the world and how it's not fair, and how a person like him, and it was a Baptist home, they were Christians, and how a Christian like him could have a chance at God in heaven, and there are other people around the world that don't have that chance. And then he says that Brad went to Kickapoo High School in Missouri, and he excelled in sports and debate. And so as you think about, he's got his safety and security needs met, his love and belongingness needs met, his self-esteem, because if you look like Brad Pitt and you've got, you excel in sports and debate, you're going to be popular.
I wonder how frequently he was buying new shoes.
Yeah.
Like that one?
That's good.
Kickapoo? So dumb. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Anyway,
I'm sorry.
Good thing we're not recording on that one. So then he says this, and he says, but he goes, there's one thing that I lacked. And he said, when I got into college, he goes, I jettisoned my faith. I got rid of it. And he said, when I finally got rid of my faith, then I came to know my true self. And I'm thinking, well, that's self-actualization. Oh. And so as he's talking about that, I asked the kids, I say, well, was Jesus self-actualized? And I said, did he have his physiological needs met, his safety and security needs met? We kind of went down the list, and they said, yeah. And I said, but when he had the opportunity to jettison his faith, so to speak, when he was tempted by Satan, when he was tempted at the cross to say, I don't want to do this, what did he do? He didn't say, I'm going to do my own thing. He said, not my will, but your will be done. And what he did was he turned the hierarchy of needs upside down. Because at the cross, what he did is he gave up his self-esteem needs. He gave up his love and belongingness needs. He gave up his safety and security needs. He gave up his physiological needs. And what he did, and Philippians 2 talks about this and uses this word, he self-emptied. So instead of self-actualizing, he self-emptied. Because his identity wasn't in himself.
Yeah.
His identity was in who he was as God's son, right? And so that self-emptying is in stark contrast to the self-actualizing that we have in our world today. So that's some of the things that I was kind of wanting to at least start to talk about.
Yeah.
And where it goes from there is fine.
Perfect.
There's a couple of books here. James Sire's The Universe Next Door is a really good worldview book. And then I know Alex is familiar with the Carl Trueman's book, Strange New World.
Oh, yeah.
This talks about kind of where we are now, where you've got this he calls it individual expressionism is what he refers to it as. And there's just a little section here I can read and explain what that is.
Individual expressionism.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. To where today your value and your meaning comes from your identity and to who you feel
how you express identity through culture, gender. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I love it. Let's do it.
This is Disruption. Hey guys, welcome to the Disruption Podcast. I am right now your anchor for today because Sam he's just...
You should make it.
Well, I guess I'll make it, yeah.
Hopefully.
It's starting to be a running joke now that Sam is always...
Putting blinds in.
He's kind of...
Stalling.
Works-based salvation, am I right? No,
That's right.
no, it's just kind of a running joke at this point that he's gonna be late or whatever. But okay, so today, so I'm Alex Sikma. This is Nehemiah Shaw, your normal anchor, and we brought back Todd Schenck.
Yeah.
Only
Good to
my
be back.
favorite high school teacher ever.
Usually when students say that, they're looking to get some bonus points. So
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's no way I'm going to be getting extra credit at this point.
His GPA is already. Is already. Yeah.
Am I going to go to school? No, I don't know.
He's saying this.
Hey, hopefully I'll graduate this year. Actually, I'm getting on that.
We'll see how music theory goes.
We'll see how music theory goes.
You better pass music theory.
I'm at the point now where I'm either going to pass it or I'm going to fail it at this point. There's only like a few final projects and then the final exam, but I'm at a C right now. So
dancing on the razor's edge.
there you go. D is for diploma.
Yeah. D is, all I got to do is get a D and I'll be fine.
That's funny. I'm happy to meet you. Yeah, I told you out there that it was, I loved listening to the episode that you were on. That was the one, since I started, that was the one that I wasn't able to be on. Now here we are.
Well, Josh and I had a good conversation, and Alex as well. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's good to be here.
Now you're back.
I'm excited for this conversation because, well, when I went through your high school class, like with worldviews and all that stuff, and I had friends who were seniors and like when I was a junior or sophomore or whatever, and I just remember them talking about your class and just like all the stuff that they were talking about. I was like, whoa, that's interesting. That's interesting. I like that. I'm really excited for this. And then sure enough, when I got in, it was, I mean, of course it was a little heady. It was like way up here.
I think it's robust. There's no doubt about that, but it's relevant. I think it's a necessary class to have as you guys go out into the world.
I was telling you before this too, that I hadn't, so I was homeschooled. And so I guess I was taught a bit more in regards to, say, like we were talking about communism and socialism and what that's done to the world. So I guess I was a bit more aware of that than most high schoolers. But none of my friends, I remember talking to people and none of my friends knew about any of that, any of the things you were teaching.
You're not getting this type of a worldview class in the public schools for sure. Many of the Christian schools, I don't think are really digging into this. But I think it's necessary. I teach at NorthPointe Christian. I teach junior Bibles hermeneutics of the Word of God, and then I see senior Bibles kind of hermeneutics of the world. So we're interpreting the world that we're going out in, always looking at these worldviews through the lenses of a biblical Christian worldview. So to comparing and contrasting them. And I think that when you get to the bottom line, the final analysis, that they just don't stand up to the scrutiny that a biblical Christian worldview does. So anyway, I brought a couple of books with me too, so maybe referencing those as we talk about this subject of identity and image and how the culture kind of shapes or wants to shape our identity. But we need to find that firm foundation of our image, right, in Jesus Christ, our Savior, God who created us in His image and is conforming us to the image of His Son, Jesus Christ.
So I got a question. When it comes to where we're at in our culture today, and with the whole concept of I guess gender expression and expressing your own identity, not just when it comes to gender, but just the whole idea of what is it? Not Invictus. I'm the captain of my soul. This whole concept of taking control of your own identity and your own character. Where did that kind of start? Like what we can see right now, looking in culture, where was that main transition?
So that's a great question, and you can go way back. But I'm going to start during the time of the Enlightenment, which is in the mid 1800s, is kind of where I want to start. with a couple of philosophers that were contemporaries, but I don't know if they knew each other. They may have known each other, but weren't working together. And one is Friedrich Nietzsche, and the other is Karl Marx. Nietzsche is probably most famous for his parable, The Madman, and it comes out of a writing that he did called The Gay Science, joyful science. Maybe in our culture today I need to define my terms. And in this parable, The Madman, what he says is there was a madman who came into a crowd of people, and during the day had a lantern. And he threw the lantern down, and it broke. As he cried out, "Where is God? We have killed him." And so the "God is dead" phrase that maybe you've heard before comes from Friedrich Nietzsche, or at least credited to him. And as he's talking about them killing God and not having light anymore, he says, "We've released ourselves from the Son of all sons. Where are we now? We're tumbling. There's really no anchor to hold us anymore, and all is darkness."
Who can wash the blood off our hands?
Who can wash? There you go.
God's
you know the
bleed
parable.
too, you know.
God's bleed too. And what are these churches except for the sepulchers of
Tombs
a
and
dead
sepulchres
God?
of a dead God.
Exactly. So with that said, and he wasn't bemoaning the fact, he rejoiced the fact, right? But at the same time, he was realistic in saying, is if there is no anchor for anything, then we're lost, right? There's no center that holds.
So
kind of thing.
When he said God is dead, because I've heard two different things. I've heard people say that he said that, gloriously. And I think it's a cheesy movie, but came out when I was in high school, God's Not Dead. And then there was the professor that was like, he just said, God is dead, as if it's like, yeah. And I've heard some people also say that he said it, but he was terrified because he knew exactly what was coming.
Yeah.
And so did he say it triumphantly and happily, or did he say it understanding exactly the death that was going to come after that?
Well, I think he's a prophet, really, when it comes to where we are now and what it would lead to, because he was in the midst of modernism. Yeah. And what happened is we've got a shift now into postmodernism. Probably where we are is postmodernism, and I think Nietzsche saw that. At the foundation of a Christian worldview is revelation, right? It's God's revelation specifically, it's God's revelation generally. And built on that revelation is our ability to be able to reason. God is a reasonable God. And then our experience that we have. All those together, I think, are a foundation for a biblical Christian worldview. When Nietzsche said that God is dead, revelation now is gone, right? And in the midst of the Enlightenment, you have reason. And so reason took the throne. So reason and experience were the two. But now in a postmodern world, reason has been called into question. Reason's out the door, so all you have is experience. So Nietzsche saw that. If you've unleashed yourself from any kind of anchor, that's all you have, is your perspective. All you have is what Carl Trueman calls in a book, A Strange New World, is an expressive individualism. And that's where we kind of live in the world that we live in today. The two questions that you have to ask of any worldview is, who is God and who am I? And if there is no God, if you're not going to fall into the trap of nihilism, which means that there's nothing, no meaning, no purpose, no nothing, then you have to create your own self. The self has to be good and ultimately perfectible, if that's the case. Yeah. All right. The best example that I can see, and we'll come back to Karl Marx later, but the best example that I can see of someone who's really grabbed onto this self-actualization is a guy named Abraham Maslow. And Maslow came up with a hierarchy of needs. In his hierarchy of needs, he says that everyone needs to have their physical needs met. And once those needs are met, your safety and security needs need to be met. Safety and security needs are met, then you're going to have your love and belongingness needs met, and then your self-esteem needs met. And once all those needs are met, then you're ready to be self-actualized, an authentic person. You're able to be creative and all of this. But until all those needs are met, you can't reach that pinnacle. I read an article a few years back about Brad Pitt. And go ahead.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
About.
I'm sorry, I get talking too much.
No, that makes sense. I just want to. So, put a pin in. We're about to talk about Brad Pitt. When it comes to that, the concept of getting your needs met, it sounds like to get that, first need to be in kind of a personal state of utopia, right? It's because and Marxism and socialism, like these things that we're going to be talking about too, that's a huge idea. That's the goal, right? That humanity would get to a place of utopia.
Yeah.
Is that kind of like an idea as well, that in order to fully get that, you need to have at least this area right here be in a state of utopia?
Yeah, for Marxism, I think with secular humanism, we call it, and really secular humanism is kind of oxymoronic, because if you're secular means there is no God, but you want humans to flourish. Mm-hmm. So the question is, if there is no God, you naturally have to be a naturalist, mm-hmm. and really the only ethic in nature is survival of the fittest. So why do you care about human beings anyway if it's survival of the fittest?
Just do what you need to do to survive.
So you have to be really contradictory. You got to contradict yourself when you say, I don't believe in a God, but yet I do want humans to flourish. Now, having said that, humanism does want humans to flourish, and we are human, want humans to flourish as well. So there are some things we have in common with humanism, but there are some very clear distinctives too that we need to make sure that we make clear. All right, so with secular humanism, back to that, mm-hmm. If we are good and ultimately perfectible, and that's what the goal is, to ultimately perfect humanity, mm-hmm. For Marxism, it's a little different. With Marxism, we're a clean slate, but ultimately moldable. And so what will happen is, Marx says, is that if we create this utopia that you talk about, then that utopia, which, by the way, is deterministic, it's going to happen. You can't stop it. But that utopia will actually create not only a perfect person, but will create a perfect world.
So the Übermensch?
Well, that would, going back to Nietzsche, would be the Übermensch, yeah. And so there is a bit of a difference in the approach with secular humanism and Marxism in the view of the person. For Christianity, the view of the person, which I think is a realistic view of the person, is that we are fallen. We've rebelled against God. We said, God, we know what you say is good, but we see what is good for ourselves and we're going to take it. We told God, who wanted to partner with us in this program of human flourishing and of bringing glory to him, that we can do it on our own. And God said, okay, let's see where that gets you. That we are fallen, that we are sinful, yet we are redeemable.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is the hope of the Christian. Whereas if you have to be unrealistically optimistic if you're an atheist.
Takes a lot of faith to be an atheist.
It does take a lot of faith to be an atheist. There's no doubt about that.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, so back that answers my question then. Okay. So go ahead. Oh, also,
Sam's here.
Sam. Yeah. Hey,
Sam's here.
Speaking of Brad Pitt.
Speaking of Brad Pitt. That's a good point.
Hi, guys.
I have no idea what he sounds like.
So thanks for popping in the conversation, Sam.
So
thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Sam.
Wow. Okay. Hope the blinds were good.
Yeah, how are the blinds?
I couldn't see him.
Oh, okay.
Fish were okay?
Fish were okay too.
Okay, I'm a little lost here. What are the blinds? Because the context determines the meaning, and so it could be out hunting. It could be the blinds. He could work for a window store.
He could be working for blind people.
His mom is blind. We don't want to get.
Okay.
Just kidding. She's very.
So he works out. See? Well, I'll let him explain.
All right.
I work with blinds, which means I work with shades, shutters.
Yes, window blinds.
Yes, window blinds. Okay. Window treatments is what we call it.
Okay.
So that is the quick insight. So, but the running joke that sometimes we have is, hey, we're the blind guys whenever we walk into a house. And then we'll start like screwing into their door frame.
So how did you guys get a driver's license if you're blind?
If the homeowner's like right in front of you.
Ubers.
Next time you go to a house, if the homeowner's right in front of you, you should have your sunglasses and be like, hey, I'm Sam.
Like, how are your windows
off to the side?
Hi, we're the blind guys.
And then when they like touch your arm, you're like, back on track anyways. Okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so rewind.
Identity.
I trust you to pick it up.
Let me pick up with Brad Pitt, if he's watching, Brad. Hello. Okay. And
come on
anyway, so years ago, in the Sunday newspaper, you get a parade magazine that's probably obsolete to a lot of people out there who don't even know what a newspaper is anymore. But in the parade magazine, I was reading an article about Brad Pitt. He was being interviewed. And I've been teaching in NorthPointe Christian and teaching the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, leading to self-actualization. And as I'm reading the article, Brad is talking about his early childhood. And he says that as I was growing up, my dad ran a trucking company. My mom was a school counselor. All my needs were met. And I thought, okay, well, that's interesting. And as he went on, he said, and my mom used to talk to me about things that I felt were important, I didn't understand. And she'd come in my room and I had that. And I thought, okay, well, that seems to be not only your physiological needs met, your safety and security, but your love and belongingness needs are met as well. And one of the questions he had is, and he grew up in a Baptist family, a Southern Baptist family, is he said, why do I have a chance at knowing God and a chance at heaven, but there are other people around the world, and some other dot on the map, and they have no chance at all. It just doesn't seem fair. And he said, my mom would come in and talk to me about those things. And then it goes on and talks about his high school years, where he went to Missouri, is a school in Missouri called Kickapoo High School, which is kind of a funny name, but that's where he went. And he said he excelled in school debate. He excelled in sports. And of course, if you look like Brad Pitt, I'm assuming that you're going to be pretty popular. So I'm thinking, all right, your self-esteem needs are likely met. And so as he's working up the hierarchy of needs, as he's talking about himself in this interview, and then he says, and then I got into college. And he said, when I got into college, he said, I wanted to do things the Bible said not to do. And he said, I would go to a rock concert and I'd feel the same type of spiritual move, the spirit move as I would feel if I went to a revival. And he said, so I jettisoned my faith. And he said, when I jettisoned my faith, it wasn't a loss of faith, it was finding myself. I thought, wow. I said, that's exactly what the hierarchy of needs is. And Brad Pitt is kind of the top of the hierarchy of needs, self-actualized. He's authentic. He's genuine. He knows who he is. And then now his role is to go and hopefully make the world self-actualized and do what he can. If you know anything about Brad Pitt in his early days, after the Hurricane Katrina, he and his wife at the time, Angelina Jolie, went down there. They were building houses for people and things like that, which is admirable. Brad, he's watching. But then I asked my students, as I read that to them, the article, I said, well, it was Jesus self-actualized, because that's what we continually have to ask. If we are Christians, we follow Jesus Christ, is he self-actualized? And so I said, well, did he have his physiological needs met? Well, yeah, he grew up in Nazareth, his family was there. His father was a carpenter, or tecton. Did he have his safety and security needs met? Well, yeah, they protected him. They were worried about him when they left Jerusalem and he wasn't there with them. They went back to find him. He's 12 years old. Did he have his love and belongingness needs met? Yeah, his mother loved him. We know that for sure. She was at the cross there. What about his self-esteem? Well, many followed him. Hung on every word, right? I mean, there were people trying to kill him, but you had
he
all
seemed
kinds
confident.
Yeah. And so I said, well, is he like Brad Pitt? Is he self-actualized? And when it came to it, when he had the opportunity, as Brad Pitt did, to reject God, when Satan tempted him to bow down and worship him, when he was ready to go to the cross in the garden, right? And he could have said, I'm done with this. I'm not going to go to the cross for these people. He said, not my will be done, but your will be done. And Paul in Philippians says what Jesus did at that time, and he uses the word kenosis, which means self-emptying, is he self-emptied. So when he went to the cross, he turned the hierarchy of needs upside down. He gave up his self-esteem needs. He gave up his love and belongingness needs. He gave up his safety and security needs. He gave up his physiological needs. Everything he gave up. And what he got in return is to be elevated to the place, the right hand of God. Every knee shall bow and tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. So I said that, and by the way, in that Philippians passage, it tells the believers there in Philippi that you're to be like Christ. You're to be like him, esteeming others above yourself and emptying yourself just like Christ did, right? Who not only came as a man and humbled himself as a man, but humbled himself to go to the cross. And so when we look at these worldviews, we compare and contrast it to biblical Christianity, and we see that it's a different type of kingdom. It's an upside-down kingdom. And so that's one of the examples that I give. So, yeah, in today's world, though, the best that we can do is to self-actualize.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said the upside-down kingdom. I feel like I've heard the upside-down kingdom, that statement said so many times within the last, let's just say 3 months.
Yep.
Is that a new word that people have started like saying, or has that been around for a very long time? Because in my mind, maybe I'm just becoming more in tune to that, but I feel like that's a new summarization.
I got like a piggyback question off of that, because I know that's very similar to alchemy. Like the ancient concept of alchemy, as above, so below. Mm-hmm. Have you heard about this?
I'm not familiar with alchemy. I haven't.
They would obviously try to, the concept was they would try to turn metals into precious, like gold. And that was a whole idea too. As above, so below. It's like a upside down thing. So it's something that shows up in the world all the time, like reflections of things that are divine down below on earth.
Okay.
Maybe that's a different thing. I'm gonna have to probably now that I say it out loud.
The whole upside down kingdom concept, and it depends what circles you run in as to how familiar you are with it. In scriptures, okay, so the kingdom that Jesus brought, right, was a different kind of kingdom that even the Jews expected. Mm-hmm. So when the Jews expected their Messiah to come, they expected to have a Judas Maccabee. Mm-hmm. Right, and if you go back into we call it the intertestamental period or the Second Temple period, is the story in the Maccabees of Judas Maccabee, who frees the Jews. He leads them in freeing them from the Seleucids, from Antiochus Epiphanes, and they established kind of a Jewish kingdom there for about 100 years before the Romans come. All right, so when Jesus comes onto the scene, it's really interesting too that in I'm trying to think if it's John chapter 10. It's John chapter 10. In John chapter 10, Jesus is at the Feast of Hanukkah, right? It's the only time that the Feast of Hanukkah is mentioned in the Bible. Feast of Lights, Feast of Dedication, right? And that was the celebration that remembered the dedication of the temple when Judas Maccabeus freed Israel. And then they had only enough oil, it seemed, for a night, but it lasted for 8 nights, if you know the story. And so they rededicated the temple. So that's the festival that he's at. And while he's there in the temple, they want to know, are you the Messiah, right? And when he says that I and the Father are one, they pick up stones to stone him, because that festival was to celebrate the freedom. It was like their Independence Day. And it's Independence Day like at the Liberty Bell, right? I mean, you're there at the spot on the temple, that's where he is, where they're supposed to be celebrating and looking for their Judas Maccabeus to free them from the fist of Rome. Yeah. And he says, I and the Father are one. He claims to be God. Well, you know who claimed to be God? Antiochus Epiphanes, back in the time of the Maccabees, claimed to be God. Matter of fact, Epiphanes means God manifest. And so they're thinking he's Judas Maccabeus, and when he says that, there's like, oh no, you're Antiochus Epiphanes, and so now we're going to stone you.
So it's like putting up the British flag at the Liberty Bell on 4th of July. It's like, what are you? So
the kingdom that they were looking for and the kingdom they wanted is not the kingdom that Jesus Christ came to bring. Yeah. His kingdom is an upside down kingdom. Yeah. Mm-hmm. He's not going to, and this is maybe a good segue into the Marx stuff, because Karl Marx says that in order for the communist utopian to happen, there has to be a revolution. There has to be the shedding of blood. That the bourgeoisie have to be killed. You know, we talked about the bourgeoisie, or those who are the capitalists, right? They have to be put down in order for those who are oppressed, the proletariat, to rise up. And then once the proletariat take over, and there's going to have to be a dictatorship for a period of time, but then what they'll do is they'll redistribute everything, so everybody will have everything that they need, right? And what they want, and everything will be just like it should be, and then the state will go away. Well, here's what Marx didn't understand. He thought human beings are a clean slate and ultimately being able to be molded by that type of socioeconomic system. Well, that's not the case. Human beings are evil and sinful at heart. And so what happens when you have people it doesn't matter who they are, bourgeoisie or proletariat, get all this power, is they want to keep the power. Yeah. And that's what's happened in history that you've seen. All right, now, what people will say today is, and Lenin was the one who started. Lenin was the one who said, I'm going to take the Marxist playbook, I'm going to put it into practice into Russia. It was disastrous, as it was, and when Stalin took over, or when you talk about China with Mao Zedong, or you talk about Vietnam and Pol Pot, or you name it, right? Anytime communism has been tried, it's been an abject failure.
It's like 72 times.
Listen, ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have victims, and communism has been a bad idea.
Yeah.
All right, so you've got people in our world today, and this is where I'm bringing it into this idea of self-identity and stuff like that, who now say that Lenin had it wrong, right? And Stalin had it wrong, and Mao Zedong had it wrong. And Marx, and I will say that what Marx saw around him during the Industrial Revolution was a travesty. The fact that they were taking advantage of these families and these little children and making them work like they did and all that kind of stuff. And he saw this, and he said, something needs to be done, and he was right. All right, but he starts off with an atheistic base, and when you start off with a foundation like that, I don't care what you build on it, it's going to crumble. All right, so what we've done today is we say Marx still has it right, but today we need to identify who the oppressors are and who the oppressed is, right? It's no longer necessarily capitalists, right, and the proletariat or the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but, well, maybe it's sexual identity. Maybe those who are of a sexual identity that are kind of in the minority and they have been oppressed, maybe they are the oppressed. And it's those who are and you find the cisgender, all these terms that are used, white males and all this kind of stuff, they're the oppressors. And so now you live in a world today where your identity, and you proclaim it from the mountains what your identity is. But there's no foundation for that identity. That identity is fluid, and it takes us right back to Nietzsche again when it says when you take away a God, there's no center that holds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pure chaos. You can do.
So I think in the victimization, the victim society that we live in today is a result of people thinking that Marx had it right.
Yeah.
Right? It's just you're identifying who the oppressed is and who the oppressors are. And so the ones who are oppressed are the ones, and you have a spectrum, right? A whole spectrum of them. The ones who are oppressed are the ones who have the moral authority in our world today. I'm sorry. Again,
I wonder
talk too much here.
If Karl Marx had kids, would he think about the whole moldable human being? Like, would he think about that differently?
Yeah. Well, the funny thing about Karl Marx is he didn't have kids, right? Well, I take that back. I don't want to say that because I don't know for sure, but I do know he never had a job. That Frederick Engels, who is the co-author of the Communist Manifesto, his father owned a textile factory, so he was part of the bourgeoisie. And it was the money that Frederick Engels used to support Marx so that Marx would basically just be in the library all the time and writing. And so Marx never had a job.
Yeah.
He was just always writing. And I take that back, whether he had kids or not, I don't know that for sure. But
yeah.
I think his mom wrote a letter to him saying, like, go get a job and suck it up.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was driving
Stop writing.
I was driving on Division the other day, and it was a ways down Division. And there's a kid there, probably my age, honestly, mid-20s, really scraggly looking, really baggy clothes, and he was protesting on his own. He had just a board that said ACAB, all cops are bad. And he was just standing there like this. And it was 12:30. And I thought,
at night?
No, in the afternoon. She guys just standing there in the middle of the day on his own protesting. And I was like, makes sense.
Well, the thing is I don't think there's a lot of critical thinking that's going on in our world today.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how to remedy that because, like I said, in a world where you say there is no God, then there is no revelation that is a foundation, right? Specific revelation in God's Word and general revelation for that matter. So all you have is reason and experience, and reason has failed us. And so the only thing you have is experience and preference claims.
Yeah.
And that's big, too, when you talk about morality, right? You really can't talk about good and bad in a world without a God because those terms don't make any sense, right? It's just preference claims.
You're stealing those terms from
you're stealing it from Christianity.
Theological worldview.
You sure are.
Exactly.
A lot of these worldviews are taking from Christianity, right? They're taking what they want, they're cherry-picking what they want, and then saying...
Kind of convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is your... So I'm 26, and I have a pretty hopeful view of the future, not necessarily optimistic in terms of where the world is going, but optimistic in terms where so a lot of people say, hey, I would never want to raise a kid in this generation. It's a horrible world, with everything going on. I would never want to raise a kid. And I think this is exactly the kind of world I'd want to raise a kid in, because you know that you're going to raise a couple of monsters rather than everyone else, making some weak people. And I look at it in that type of optimism, like excited to walk. When I always say this, whenever anyone asks me what my favorite animal is, I tell them it's a bison, like an American bison, because they're the only animal that instinctively walks into a storm, because they understand that walking through the storm, they know that they're going to get through it a lot quicker. And so that's why I'm kind of hopeful about the future. But I guess for you, with everything in regards to gender identity and Marxism in our culture and all these things,
it's going to reach
your
a tipping
prediction?
Point. It's going to reach a tipping point. And besides that, what we're doing at NorthPointe Christian, and I think other Christian schools and families and churches should do, is raise up children who are going to go out into this world and be able to think critically into the world, and to be able to be a redemptive element in that word. Okay, I'll give you a just a small example of this. All right, you're familiar with Johnny Cash, right?
Of course.
Okay. And Johnny Cash, for most of his life, even though he had a Christian background, had rejected God. And later in his life, he came to know Christ, right? So the very last album that he did was a fantastic album, by the way. The very last album that he did, he took a song by 9 Inch Nails by Trent Reznor called Hurt. And you probably heard the song Hurt before. He sang and Trent Reznor, I don't think was a believer at all. I think he probably an atheist. He committed suicide. And it seems that Hurt was kind of like a suicide note, some have observed. And in that song, Hurt, Johnny Cash took that song and sang the exact same lyrics and changed one word. Trent Reznor says, I wear this crown of, I don't know if I can, I'll say crap, but it's the S word. I'm not sure your audience is out here, but I wear this crown of crap on my liar's chair. And Johnny Cash changed that word to I wear my crown of thorns. Okay, one word, and he redeems that whole song. See? And that's what we're called to do, is to be a redemptive element in the world. And it may be just something really small that we do when we take that out into the world.
Changing one word.
We live in a post-Christian world, but it's not unlike Paul's pre-Christian world. So when you read the book of Acts, as the word goes out from Jerusalem to Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the world, it's in a world that doesn't know who Christ is, right? But God starts with the small things. He started with Abraham, one family, and they were to be a family who impacted their world, to be a light unto the nations ultimately, and they failed in many ways. But God never gave up. And then He comes Himself, and then He's crucified, and He raises from the dead, and He's glorified, and He sends the Spirit. And again, we have the same type of Abraham sent out into the world. And so that's where we are now. We're in a post-Christian world, but there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
All right. And I think you're right. I think we need to have kids that are taken out that go out into the world to impact the world for Jesus Christ. And there's more to this life than just living and dying. There's making an impact in the time that we have, knowing that someday the King will return to redeem this world. There'll be a new heavens and a new earth, and we look forward to that. So no, I'm optimistic. I really am. But I recognize I'm realistic and recognizing the kind of world that we live in right now. And it can't sustain itself.
Right.
This whole idea of this, I can be whatever I want to be, and where does it go? It's got to run out, but there's going to be something different, but it won't be anything new. It'll just be something kind of different.
Wow. I agree with you 100% on that.
That's so good. So good. Such a great reminder of, yet again, just in essence, what Christ calls us to go out into the world and make disciples, even if that is at the smallest point.
And we can bring so much hope to, I'm so glad that like we can be optimistic and we can be hopeful, because there's so many, there's like some Christians that are like, it's just going to get worse before he comes back.
Yeah.
It's going to be really bad. And I'm just,
the signs are here.
there and I'm just like, okay, so then what's the point of like being a missionary if it seems to be hopeless?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of like, okay, like I want to be optimistic. Like I know the world is like bad right now and maybe it will get a little bit worse, but, I mean, yeah, what's going to stop us from just going out and preaching the gospel? And, you know, there's a few transgender students at GRCC, and you know, I keep having some conversations with people with like, how do I give them hope? Because a lot of them are lonely and they have no hope.
Can I just say that's a great point? And we talk about NorthPointe Christian engaging these worldviews, and to take these captive and to I said, you don't have to agree with the worldview. I said, but you need to love the people. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes down to it, and just what you're saying there, is that you love those people. You want them to come to know Christ if they, you know, if God would have that. But you don't give in to the worldviews that are out there, right? These ideas, you engage them in the marketplace of ideas. You don't give in to them. But for people, you love people. Yeah,
it's tough because so many people wrap up their worldview and all of these ideas in their own personality and in their own idea of what their identity is. And so whenever you might confront something like that, they get very offended and they say,
because it's a part of them.
Because it's part of them. So if you're attacking that, you're attacking them rather than just attacking a mindset or an idea.
Yeah.
So I wonder how as a believer, how do you challenge someone that so much of their identity is wrapped up in these ideas? And like for us as a Christian, in my mind, it seems like, hey, I like to do, I don't know, Sam, what do you like to do? Kayak, right? You like to kayak, right?
I love kayaking.
And now if I attack kayaking and say kayaking is lame, if as a believer, you'd be like, okay. But when someone starts attacking Christ and spitting on the name of Christ, you're a bit more, you get a bit more, because that is your identity.
Because that is your
right?
identity.
Like I like jiu-jitsu, and when someone talks trash about that, I'm like, oh, okay. But like I say, if I see a joke or excessive or any use of his name in vain, I get deeply hurt. And so how as a believer, how do you, with this redemption in mind, I guess, how do you gently approach talking to someone whose identity is so wrapped up in their ideas?
I think that's a great question, and it's going to be different with every person that you're going to encounter. I think most of all, they're going to see how you live.
Yeah.
So if you claim to be a Christian, your life better reflect that as much as you possibly can, because they are going to be watching what you do, not just what you say. But there are times where, you know, as you're talking and you've started maybe a friendship with these people, that, you know, you have an opportunity maybe to say something, but it has to be tactful, has to be respectful, has to be loving, right? But I think there's no blanket statement that I can tell you what to do, other than you just need to, and I think the Spirit works in this way too, to kind of lead you and help you in that regard. Yeah.
And how it's so funny, and I've said this before in the past, but I asked that question looking for a tactical reason or a tactical way to approach an unbeliever. And right after I ask it, I'm confronted with the fact that so often I try to use strategy and tactics in my walk with the Lord. And that's not biblical at all. You know, like how it's funny how much I'm trusting in a formula invented by man. I'm asking you for a formula invented by a man, and here I am with the Spirit, like the Spirit's like, you know, it's like, dude,
off to the side,
I'm right here, and I do that all the time. I look for some way to, you know, I always mention, you know, these YouTube shorts and the, you know, Instagram videos of a conservative having a gotcha conversation with a liberal, and I try to memorize those, and then I try to use those, and the whole time I have the Spirit and I have the Word of God, and that's all I need.
Yeah.
And so I guess I kind of answered my own question. That one.
Well, Sweet.
Well, I just, just to kind of end things, unless we still have more to go.
We're gonna wrap
just
up.
kind of wrap things
Take
up.
us home.
And I think that the Universe Next Door, I mentioned a couple of books by James Sire, is a really good. If you want to start thinking through worldview, this is kind of a
Hold that up real quick too.
The Universe Next Door by James Sire, and he starts off at the very beginning. Let me read this. I think it would be a good thing to read here. Well, he starts off, and this is a poem by Matthew Arnold called "The Buried Life," and it says, "But often in the world's most crowded streets, but often in the din of strife, there rises an unspeakable desire after the knowledge of our buried life, a thirst to spend our fire and restless force in tracking out our true original course, a longing to inquire into the mystery of this heart which beats so wild, so deep within us, to know whence our lives come and where they go." And for those who are the secular humanists, the atheists, and it doesn't matter who you are, there's this deep desire for meaning. And where have we come from? Where do we go? And maybe that's where you start with some of these conversations. It's like,
I just had one today.
Where's your foundation for meaning? If you're not a Christian, if you're not a one who believes in God, then where is that? And where do you find your morality? Where does that come from? And if it's different from someone else. So really, again, I think lovingly, carefully, respectfully, when you're talking to people, I think you got to get at the heart, the root of the matter, because there is that God-shaped hole in everyone's heart that just longs to be filled.
Amen.
Yeah.
I love that. We'll see you guys next week.
Yeah.
Catch you on the flip.
Yeah.
Kickapoo.
Yeah.
Shalom.
You've been disrupted.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Disruption. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate or share on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening from. You can also support us financially on our podcast website. The link for that is in the description below. Tune in on Mondays. We'll see you next week.